Are we unknowingly letting dark forces into our homes every October 31st? What's the true meaning behind Halloween? The seemingly innocent tradition where kids don costumes and roam the streets for treats. And what if I told you that the origins of this holiday might be far more sinister than you think? Could Halloween be more than just harmless fun, and instead a celebration steeped in practices that shouldn't mix with our modern lives? Today, we're diving deep into the chilling history of Halloween. From ancient rituals to modern-day customs, we'll uncover the secrets of this controversial holiday. Would you dare to face the unsettling truths about Halloween? By the end, you might reconsider letting your children partake in this spine-tingling celebration. Ready to explore the shadows of Halloween's past? Let's begin. Why is October 31st more than just a date of costumes and candy, but rather the night when the living and the dead were believed to brush shoulders? Imagine it's dusk in an ancient Celtic land over 2,000 years ago. Families gather close, the air is thick with anticipation, and an eerie festival called Samhain is about to begin. Forget trick-or-treating. This was the time when it was believed that the spirits of the dead could cross into the world of the living. Celts extinguished their hearth fires, leaving their homes dark and cold. The reason? To prevent evil spirits from taking refuge inside. Families would share stories about their ancestors, preparing a banquet with extra servings set aside for the deceased, a gesture of respect and hope that the spirits would offer protection in the coming year. Druids, the Celtic priests, hoped to gain insight into the future as they performed rituals around a massive community bonfire featuring burning crops and livestock. Can you imagine relying on fire and sacrifice to know what's ahead? Now here's a twist. That familiar custom of wearing costumes likely has its roots in this festival. But it wasn't superhero or princess costumes back then. People wore disguises to mimic and appease the roaming spirits, a clever way they believed to escape harm. But the festival of Samhain didn't just vanish. As Christianity spread, the church aimed to replace pagan festivals with Christian holidays. They didn't abolish Samhain. Instead, they transformed it. November 1st became All Saints' Day to honor the Catholic saints who didn't yet have their own day. Over time, the focus shifted away from Samhain's grim nature to a more benign observation. All Saints' Day, or All Hallows' Day in Old English, took center stage, and the night before, the evening once dedicated to rituals and disguises evolved into something else, Hallows' Eve, or as we know it today, Halloween. Now, question for you. Do you think these harmless costumes and decorations still carry some of that old spirit, or are they just remnants of a forgotten tradition? Drop your thoughts in the comments. How did a Roman goddess become a symbol of Halloween? Let's take a journey back to a different kind of celebration, the Roman festival of Feralia. The Romans had their own November rituals, honoring the dead and burning sacrifices at their graves. When they conquered Celtic lands, this tradition grew over the centuries, intertwining with the already mysterious festival of Samhain. Feralia wasn't just about acknowledging spirits. It was a time of mourning and appeasement. Families paraded to their ancestors' graves with food, a somber reminder that the cycle of life continues and that the dead should never be forgotten. By adding this Roman touch, Samhain took on a new depth. But there was another Roman influence at play, the festival of Pomona, the Roman goddess who presided over fruit, trees, and gardens, symbolizing abundance. Her trademark? The apple became a symbol of her bounty and endurance, representing the unbroken cycle of growth from seed to harvest. Over time, these influences merged with Samhain into what we know today as Halloween. Does this explain the familiar tradition of bobbing for apples? In part, yes. This seemingly innocent game carries echoes of Pomona's rites of fertility and abundance and symbols of harvest and life. But here's the twist. The apple falling deeper into the water wasn't just a fun challenge, but a metaphor for life's unpredictability. How many of these layers of tradition have survived to our times, transformed beyond recognition? Now pause for a moment. What do you think about this convergence of cultures in Halloween? Do you see it as a natural evolution of traditions? Or do you think something of the original meanings has been lost along the way? Share your thoughts in the comments. How did a sacred Christian parkour become entangled with the complex web of pagan traditions to form the celebration we know today as Halloween? Let's unravel this mystery. In 601 CE, Pope Gregory made a shrewd move. Instead of stamping out pagan customs, he chose to incorporate them into Christianity. This strategy was not about eradicating paganism, but about weaving it into the Christian narrative. Why did he do this? Imagine dealing with newly converted regions, vibrant with their own rich traditions and customs. Instead of banning pagan practices, Pope Gregory sought to transform them. By reinterpreting these festivals and symbols within a Christian framework, he eased the transition for new converts, allowing them to hold on to their beloved celebrations while infusing them with a new sacred meaning. One striking result of this initiative was the creation of All Saints' Day. Initially, this feast day was on May 13th, but Pope Gregory III moved it to November 1st in the 8th century. This shift wasn't random. It put All Saints' Day right on top of the traditional Celtic festival of Samhain. The goal was clear: replace the remembrance of spirits and the dead, activities that the Church had long viewed with suspicion, with the veneration of saints. But did it really work? With over 2,000 saints in the Catholic tradition, many with their own feast days, All Saints' Day became a spiritual roundup, a day for all saints left out of the regular calendar. It was a way to ensure that all saints, not just the big names, were respected and celebrated. But what about the night before? Known as the Vigil of All Hallows, or Halloween, this night was dedicated to remembering all who had died, in particular those dear to each person. This tradition was about more than just respect. It was about connecting the living and the dead in a web of collective memory and prayer. By this time, the Church firmly opposed the idea of spirits visiting from the afterlife, but nevertheless linked All Hallows' Eve to damnation. Thus, in a paradoxical twist, Halloween became jocular, a time when people could safely and humorously indulge their fears. Participating in small acts of mischief or masquerading as sinister figures from history or folklore became a way to purge those fears through laughter together. Does knowing this historical tapestry shift your view of Halloween? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Who would have thought that the trick-or-treat tradition we all cherish could find its roots in an open grave? Don't get spooked. Let me explain. About 8 centuries ago, the Catholic Church in Europe introduced a new holiday on November 2nd, All Souls' Day, established as the last piece of the Church's plan to replace Samhain. This holiday was dedicated to honoring the dead, with homage for saints and prayers for everyone. But what does this have to do with trick-or-treating? And what about the fear of open graves? All will be revealed. People were often visited by mysterious figures who dressed up symbolically as the recently departed locals who hadn't properly honored them. They paid for the alleged oversight with food, including confectionery. For adding to the oddity during the rituals, graves were often left empty to produce the impression that the spirits had indeed awakened. The legends finally gave rise to the practice of souling, or doling out special soul cakes in acknowledgement of the hallowed night and as a fitting offering for the spirits of the dead. Did you guess the response? Some customs that later evolved from All Hallows Day into practices considered part of Halloween included dressing up as spirits and giving out soul cakes. It progressed until we arrived at the trick-or-treat tradition. Children would dress in costumes and knock on doors throughout the villages. Have you ever heard the jumping, jarring refrain that originates from this age-old English custom taken straight from the history books? A soul cake. A soul cake. Please, good lady, a soul cake. An apple, a pear, a plum, or a cherry. Any good thing to make us all merry. 1 for Peter, 2 for Paul, 3 for him who made us all. Now imagine this scene. Kids dressed up as spirits knocking on doors, their innocent vigil reminding everyone that in forgetting the dead, they risk so much more than a trick. Quite a different take on trick or treat, right? Drop a comment if you'd be brave enough to participate in a tradition like this one. Did you know that the custom of jack-o'-lanterns was introduced to America by Irish immigrants fleeing the potato famine? Although they used other crops like beets and potatoes, the American pumpkin was found to be the best plant for carving faces, and you've likely heard the narrative of Jack and the lantern seeker before. But who is Jack? The scene is set in a little village where the character of Stingy Jack is well known for his shrewd pranks. Jack was notorious for his cunning. During the Year of the Souls, he tricked the devil into paying the village's bar bill in exchange for having his soul, making the devil promise not to bother him for another year and gallantly switching places when the time was right. Imagine the faces of the villagers, a mortal tricking the Prince of Darkness himself. Over the years, Jack pulled off similar pranks again and again. 10 years had passed when Jack eventually passed away and found himself at the pearly gates, but the celestial guardians knew of his escapades. What's worse, Jack's contract with the devil also kept him from going to hell. And what happened? Outcast from the next world and without a house to go to, the devil gave Jack a blazing rock to shine in the pitch-black darkness and a carved turnip to protect it. Due to this unusual situation, he earned the moniker of Jack of the Lantern, which evolved into Jack-o'-lantern, funny and wise. A little terrifying too. Travelers claim to have seen the candlelight of the Jack-o'-lantern wandering alone between heaven and earth, uncertain about his destination. Keep this in your mind the next time you see a pumpkin gleam on Halloween night. It is an embroidery of fantasy and cruelty, illuminating an ancient story's discovery. Could it be possible that candles on jack-o'-lanterns were meant to show lost spirits the way to heaven? Put your opinion in the comments. Could the innocent Halloween games we've known for years hide pagan roots linked to complex rituals of life and death? Let's take a dive into history to reveal the origins of these traditions. We go back to the days of Celtic belief, when a basin of water and a few apples were considered all worldly connection and powers. Water, this primary element that represents life, became the stage as interference on the line of life and gains that defy uncertainty. Does this remind you of anything? It resembles our classic game of bobbing for apples, but there is more to it than simply enjoyment. Celts used this practice as reverence, authorization of life with their hands behind their backs, submerged in the water, and took the fruit of immortality. Now think, what if it were more than just funny and timed perfectly, and was seen as a sort of cosmopolitan connection between the living and the deceased? This gives a completely new twist on a seemingly innocuous pastime, and the game has been updated throughout the years while maintaining its identity. Try to recall the precise moment when you try to grasp those apples, your reflection dancing on the surface of eerie water as marbles debated who amongst you will marry first, a gamble made famous in ancient fortune-telling techniques. And do you know why? Well, beyond being just fruity fruit, apples have an intriguing, legendary vibe connected to the destiny of the marriage. And now this apparent academic debate occasionally surfaces as a tension. The conclusion: you can find out if you'll be the chosen one to develop a family, and live happily ever after by bobbing for apples with a cloth tied around your eyes. Therefore, weird and odd as it may be, stop for a second and consider whether this is only a minor contest of stability of hands and ambition, or if there is more to it than that. Could it be that bobbing for apples represents bereaving love of premonitions and fate? Drop your comment below and help me to unravel this mystery. You must be questioning if all of this weirdness is still here. Unquestionably, traces of it persist in Halloween customs to this day. For instance, do you recall how lovely it was when you set pumpkins in your front yards with your beloved? What was your actual purpose? To make homes friendly? Absolutely, but not solely. Oh, the magic of Halloween celebrations. Can you imagine all of these cultural tales embedded into our system, beginning with a real bonfire, the thread weaving a narrative that takes us back through time? In ancient Celtic times, pyres lit up the evening to keep bad spirits away during the Samhain festival. Imagine that shouting chants and flames rising beneath the smooth night skies. This habit, which had its roots in the cult of fire, evolved into the recognizable jack-o'-lantern crafts we now associate with pumpkin, candles, and stereotypical faces. Had you honestly ever imagined that a simple carved fruit might once have been a weapon against darkness? It didn't. These memories made it through the centuries, adapting and changing. Let's now consider how the severe meanings of the past blended with the modern element of entertainment and shock. There's a little bit shared with time. Pranks and jokes became popular, especially in the US between the 19th and 20th centuries. Making pumpkins was a sign of the disliked and departure. Think about the absurdity of the circumstance. This custom was preserved for us not just for building a pleasant environment, but also for the fervor of skeptics who loved playing unexpected, silly pranks. And what about the normal pumpkin state today? It's a cheerful nod to All Hallows Eve, a landscape filled with nostalgia, little fear, and a dash of humor. It might be claimed that they reflect remnants of Celtic ritual, Roman influence, and that American force that continuously turns everything into a spectacle bigger and better. People today experiment with pumpkin cuttings, and they're pushed into fields of abstraction and creativity, which preserve the ancient knowledge of driving the bad spirits away and make sure it has a good time. Let's continue diving into the roots of our wonderful Halloween. So here's the question: how did Halloween come to America? The response is rightfully complex, full of imagination, as well as cultural interactions. Do you recall when America opened its doors to the world, and while a lot of individuals came from neighboring countries, others ventured across the ocean, just like the Irish? And my friends, that is when Halloween came to these regions. The new beginning, the 1840s. Yeah, during that period, the Irish were looking for better lives overseas, and they brought their customs along with them. However, hold on tight, because it's far more complex than simply import-export. Think about the 20th century. That is when everyone desired to start again in America, and when they arrived, each group brought a piece of Halloween into a wild mix of horror story time. These new civilizations suddenly began to merge into one. You may ask at this point, wait, was Halloween a big melting pot? Absolutely. When the Irish settled in, they observed that their customs like apple bobbing and wearing costumes were merged with colonial harvest festivals. The locals took these components and delivered them to well-known Halloween parties. At the time, these early Halloween events spread around the country like wildfire or leaf-covered tantry. However, maybe you did not see these fascinating complexities before. But did you know that young English men and women used peelings during apple bobbing as wedding predictors? Who could have imagined that simple act of trying to cut fruit with peeling had an underlying romantic significance? And what about charming old Southern Ireland? Many sometimes engaged in divination games, including midnight turns on hopeful night suitors. The performance of assisting, in the meantime in Wales, women used apple seeds to predict their future husbands, like little fortune tellers. But this is where it gets tricky. In Scotland, only those with high integrity dared to peel an apple. The outcome of the longest continuous peel converted into initials of their destined husband. Yes, these are the legends that have stood against time, kindled by love and ceremony surrounded by some wonder. Drop your thoughts and join the conversation. But at what price does this new cultural tradition carry mistreatment on the surface? Yes, you did hear that right. During Halloween, when everyone was clamoring to grab an apple for their fortune-telling games, did you understand how common it had been to poison sugar? Give them out to youngsters as often as olive on a beggar. It is a move from games and horoscopes to betrayal. While it seems like a standard Halloween treat, or pick the apple that tells you who you're going to marry, you never know if you are receiving a curse from some wicked creatures or a lovely talk about your future beloved, scheduled to accept their destiny. Now everyone linked Halloween candy to superstition, but when and how did this habit originate? Well, it has a history that stretches beyond "they want Catholics who used grace at dinner time," or who believed the old prophecy mentioned witches riding more shadows than a pair of souls. Oh, not quite. It wasn't always simple candy, and there wasn't always a commercial campaign. Ironically, under capitalism, it formally positioned itself as an enemy to the paranormal. Halloween was seized by capitalism in the US and other more affluent regions during the 20th century. The increase in consumerism brought about an increase in demand for sweets, which boosted commodities like dismal myths and urban legends, which people continue to tell in other forms. In a strange twist, this connection made candy into a tool of panic, whispers of poisoning, threats in disguise, and the poison itself. Unexpectedly, it turned into a new emotion combined with nostalgia and horror. As consumerism took control and those narratives turned into what they are now, reminders of a spiritual period gone by. Moments of camaraderie, sisters striding down empty lanes dressed as a little ghost, monsters, and other characters. However, you now see how real-life myth and business have built a complex network that is the origin of traditions we still maintain as common and essential in our cultures. The tradition of giving, receiving, and savoring is paradoxically both sweet and deadly, innocent and dangerous. It is a reflection of ourselves, speaking as forcefully of our spirituality as a delusion. No, we don't have to run for the hills while holding a torch. As you can see, to push away or fear what we consider to be detrimental is perhaps shared by us more than we cared to acknowledge. A sign of our humanness, and as expected, we tend to be flawed. You are now aware of Samhain, a Celtic tradition preserved in oral history. It was said among them that the flexibility of time quite reorganized in the darkening of the horizon at the start of autumn. And wasn't that merely superstitious rumor? You may ask how this is at all relevant. Consider how all of this impacts modern customs such as Halloween and even popular entertainment. Consider the movies and TV series. The classic trope of the dead returning on Halloween? You guessed it. From the Celts, although stylized and polished by a few centuries of pop culture. Modern Americans dancing at costume parties around a softly crackling bonfire on Halloween night. Nothing new, and since 2 millennia ago, the Celts are way ahead of us. Their gloomy memories persist in our present because we appreciate the retreat at this time of year, masking our hidden respects. In America, the growing regard for public ritual mirrors the centuries-old custom started by American Celts. While it may sound surprising, the lessons of past and present blend into a continual celebration of the mysterious kaleidoscope. No, this celebration isn't an evil invocation or arcane powers aimed to destroy us. Rather, it is a fascinating mixture of world's culture that we have come to embrace and change into a global tradition as a product of collaboration rather than conflict. Are you starting to see how these fragments of collective memory, filtered through the screen and the light of a campfire, enhance our own cultural language, perhaps without us realizing it? It was when the Catholic Church started whispering memories of the persecution of witches that those in Reformation saw the unacceptability of Halloween celebrations, seeing the dangers in these superstitious fears. However, we may have been swimming in saltier waters. To break the religious string, colonial Virginia gradually rebelled against the inherent vice. Instead, colonial celebrations inspired by harvest festivals celebrated community and the gifts of the land, the vestiges of a Catholic festival that had strayed from its previous moral enemies. Then All Hallows Eve was suddenly restored. Ghost tales and the building of gathered bonfires harked to the days of the past, despite their removal. However, the concept re-emerged in the mid to late 19th century due to the efforts of a single determined lady, Mary Kelly. The repressed memories of his eventful Celtic faith swelled like a bittersweet nectar in his heart, and sparked tales of ghosts and fancy costumes that had previously brought on the anger of the pious, revolutionary Puritans. A strange déjà vu. We must, if nothing else, surrender to the charm of these stories and the comfort of such religious ease. Even today, the witches, demons, elves, and witches who allegedly invaded there offer more of a connection to our shared histories that are still used as well. Even today, whenever we choose to get lost in our nostalgic memory, creating the ideal setting for children and storytellers to deepen up the waters of their ancestors. How did these tales reach us and become ingrained in our habits? 1898 saw the beginnings of a tradition, altering articles in publications such as Ladies' Home Journal, Harper's Bazaar, and Good Housekeeping. They blended old customs with modern culture, inspiring a new spirit of festivity. Readers were encouraged to have costume parties, with guests dressed in medieval European and colonial American outfits, with homes suitably garmented in pumpkins, branches, and vines. As you read them, can't you imagine the setting? Books such as The Basket Woman and An Idyll of Halloween in the Middle Temple revealed how this touch of domesticity continued to inform our culture, getting a viral push. These articles on reimagined Halloween fiction influenced generations of writers and artists as the authors and productions of new tales leading into the 20th century. Isn't it amazing how these publications pioneer the trend of themed house parties, a concept that we now take for granted? If you stop to think about it, you can see the roots of modern Halloween costume parties in the past too. Furthermore, advice columns even shared clever ideas for reinventing furniture and decorations to perfect the illusion. Train table corners for makeshift caves, brilliant. Isn't it just a twist that the newspaper suggested hiding a wooden skeleton in a cabinet to give the appearance of scary randomness? In reality, these ideas were not just for the household, linking with diners in fashionable dining rooms. How did they operate? As a sign of good manners, they featured mysterious cranberry molds and soup in hollowed pumpkins served under barren trees with ominous names, reflecting brilliant painting proposals, of course. Thus, it's evident that the modern Halloween tradition has a deep-rooted ancestor. Possessions in their history, and let's not forget the terrible era of World War II. Before the world was turned upside down, there is a story here. During the 1800s, Halloween began to make its way in America and evolve into the neighborhood and community-centered event we all love. Parties in small villages focused on making costumes and celebrating the harvest. This development was so strong that by the 1920s, Halloween was in nearly every American village. But there was a sad side. This tradition experienced an upheaval along the journey, and in the 1920s and 1930s, with the growth of Halloween, Its risky twin Arculum evading celebrations were changed into sinister events of atrocity. Young people and everyone who planned to pull severe pranks met on this day. But hold on, do you want to know something that would make our hearts turn faster? First of all, by 1933, the 31st of October began to be known as Black Halloween, to hold in accordance with news headlines such as a night of terror, as burrows turning into battlefields of augurs and tricks. Literature reveals the depths. I mean, pot-belly stoves ended up in the middle of the street, farmers' wagons left behind by the riverbank, and horses galloped, spinning neighborhood lawns. On this infamous day in Louisville, Colorado, factory yard cattle were released to roam the neighborhood. Imagine the confusion and defacing that took place. On the other side, near Des Moines, wild youths tossed up manholes to watch if the local grannies could climb out. Of course, the fire hydrants were an addition to the chaos, bad boys streaming and flooding the streets. In rural areas, bridges were also dismantled and collectively heaped. In one town, a straining force of 200 personnel worked overtime to fix the mess of key windows, animal detectives, and stolen pesticides. Now here's the million-dollar question. Could all of this possibly continue? The amazing climax wasn't enough, but there was a sudden twist in the tale. Do you remember how we shared about Halloween candies and how wartime restrictions impacted these custom candies, but caused a genuine revolution among the masses, depriving people's rejections? Famine, especially chocolates, became a valuable currency in the black market as rule breakers stocked the banned products to benefit. History recorded that as the sales of sweets reached record levels, the government worked to ensure that supplies would reach the most in need. And who? Why talk about what if everyone had some additional sweets on Halloween? Isn't it interesting that a celebration once sparkling with the diverse experiences associated with food subversively overthrew its intrusion thanks to worldwide disorder? But hold on, the narrative's main character is much more than just simple candy. During this time, the expression trick or treat emerged from the shadows and became a release valve for bothering problems. Now tell me, isn't that ironic, with increased demand for gasoline contributing to high costs and limits? This push for sweetness precisely what unraveled the daily routine of many. It does. With fuel restrictions still in place in North Carolina after Halloween 1947, there was one more shortfall. But dairy industries opposed to the idea of sharing creamy treats to both adults and children alone. Now we arrive in the 1950s, a time when ritual persisted even though we'd left most of our horrors behind. How did the image of Halloween and jack-lantern of cobwebs take shape? You see, it was the advertising genius combined with the power of media that gave us this embarrassing depiction of epic terror, and post-World War II America marked a time of change. But wasn't perhaps the scale compensation the ability to generate supernatural wonder through man's domestication? Wow, beautifully put. Norway magicians and owls were selling their services using well-known Halloween symbols. These mascots were featured prominently on posters and advertisements and invokes the spirit of darkness, making them become guardians of mischief. Let's not forget now, in all this chaos of the modern era, does the black hat not serve as a symbol of modern hybridism? A relic of dread, drawing us somehow closer to our roots? That's right. The black hat on Halloween is the mysterious past that keeps us grounded in collective memory, as now stay with me to conclude this narrative. Halloween is more than just a gathering. It is a living link to human storytelling legacy. So here we are as you read these words. You are not just gaining knowledge, you are honoring a legacy and keeping it alive. So I challenge you not to forget where we've come from, but to enrich where we're going. Feel free to share your fears and your tales in the comments. Press the like button if you wish to keep the light of these stories lit and wish to hear more. Follow me if you want to join this collective effort to conserve history not only as a memory, but as a part of who we are. After all, as long as we continue to whisper, feel, and share stories like this, the nerve of humanity we help to weave doesn't go away. You are important to this. Let's stay connected and continue narrating our story after subscribing to the channel. Check out these 2 engaging videos I'm leaving on the screen and learn more about captivating and informative tales. Feel free to choose one that appeals to you. I'll see you in the following one.